Amulya Malladi, I am thrilled to get to talk to you and have you on How Writers Revise. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
You and I had the privilege of working with you so many years ago, and since then you have published many more books. I'm just going to give viewers a quick overview. You're the best-selling author of 9 novels, including one of my very favorites, The Copenhagen Affair, House for Happy Mothers, Mango Season. You have your most recent, A Death in Denmark, that releases in March. Your books have been translated into several languages, including Dutch, French, German, Spanish, Danish, Romanian, Serbian, and Tamil, new to me. You won a screenwriting award for your work on, I don't know how to say it in Danish. How do you say it?
It's
It
it's island.
translates to island. And that aired on Amazon Prime Global and Studio Canal Plus. You are living in California, Danish citizen, born and raised in India. Welcome.
Thank you.
So here's a couple of the things I loved about your bio that I want to dig into, but let's start with this one. At 11 years old, you wrote your first novel, 50 handwritten pages. Had you been interested in writing before that, or was this just suddenly something you thought you'd try, and was it just for fun, or did you actually think, hey, I'm going to be a writer?
I can't remember, but what I do remember is that I loved books. I loved books so much. I read books all the time. It was my way out. And because my father was in the army, every army camp we went to had a library. So we used to have these Enid Blyton books. So I used to read, The Secret Seven and The Famous Five and The Wishing Tree and The Magic Faraway Tree, The Wishing Chair and Magic Faraway Tree. And I was absolutely in love with it. And then, I graduated to Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys. And there were no Indian books for young people. They were comic books called Amar Chitra Kathas, but there were no young adult books. And that's why I decided to write one. And that was the first 50 pages about some kids who go to a village, and now, something gets temple jewels get stolen, and I have no clue what I did. I don't remember very clearly. But I did write that, and I'm sure it's somewhere in a box.
Was your intention just to write a story for yourself where you saw yourself
no,
reflected in it, or to do
I was
something
going to
with it?
I was going to publish, and
Okay.
I was going to be. I remember writing a note to myself. I don't know what age I wrote that, and saying I'm going to be a best-selling author. I knew what that meant, by the way, which is remarkable. And my parents were not very supportive. So they were like, oh, study, don't write, and this is nonsense. And I remember telling my mother, one day I'm going to become a very famous author, and I'll never thank you for it because you won't deserve the thank you. And when my first book came out, that's the thing my mother said, oh, that's why you didn't thank us for it.
What I find really funny is that you said you weren't going to thank your parents. Your parents weren't supportive.
Yes.
Is that why you wound up not majoring in anything? You majored in engineering.
I did, but then I came to the US, and then I made my first decision as a grown-up, an adult, and that decision was to do a master's in journalism. And I have never regretted it, but my parents were like horrified. And, oh, you'll never get a job, you're going to die broke. What are the possibilities? I did very well for myself, so I'm fine with it. And I loved it. I enjoyed learning to be a journalist. If I have a regret, it is I wish I had, maybe worked as a journalist. But that didn't happen. And, I ended up in marketing.
Was it your plan at the time, though, when you got the master's, to go into journalism?
God, yes.
So what happened?
Me and Bob Woodward, we were going to be like that. I don't know. I was afraid of, I was on a visa. I was on a student visa. And I wanted a job that would then sponsor me for a work visa. So it became really important that I find a corporate job because, I was going to get a job at, forget the newspaper in Memphis, because that guy, I met the editor-in-chief, and he said, sure, I'll hire you, but, we're not going to sponsor your H-1B. So I kind of like, oh, I want to stay in this country. So I decided to get a corporate job. I loved it. I enjoyed it, but it kind of sidetracked me from being a journalist.
So when did you get back to your writing after that?
I never stopped writing. I always wrote, but not, I didn't know what it meant. But we were living in, again, due to visa issues, we just got married, my husband and my husband's Danish, and we were living in London for 6 months. And I was working California time, so I was up half the night because my company was in California, and I started to write a book, and I wrote another, and then I still didn't know how to edit then. And just kind of having the ability to write a book, which seemed impossible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, write like 350 pages, whatever it might be. So that was kind of, and I was how old was I? I was like 23 years old. So that was when I first started working on it. And then I started to get quite serious about writing more and more and started to find my voice. And then wrote, I don't remember what I wrote. I wrote something and started looking for an agent, figured out what the business is all about, got to go find an agent. In those days, you had to print everything, stamped envelope and all of that. So I did all of that, and I did that relentlessly. I collected 93 reject letters from agents over 2 years.
Wow.
And 2 manuscripts. And then finally, I sold A Breath of Fresh Air. I found an agent for A Breath of Fresh Air, and she sold it to Ballantine Books. So that was sort of the journey.
And when was that?
Um, 2000, I sold. The book came out 2001. No, 2002. 2002, the book came out. I sold it 2001. I can't remember. No, my son was born 2001, so I sold it in 2000. My book came out in 2000.
And at this point, you were still working in marketing, right?
Yeah, I was. But then we moved to Denmark.
Okay.
So when my book came out, we had just moved to Denmark because I decided I was going to be a full-time writer. It lasted about 2 years, and I realized I can't be a full-time writer. I like the balance of work and writing, because writing is a very lonely profession. And, suddenly turning into mountain man, who never shaved her legs. I was just in the house all the time. It was not good and emotionally not healthy. So now I balance 2 careers, and it's good.
I love that perspective. I hear a lot of authors, their big dream is to be able to get to the point where they can quit their day job to be able to write full time. And I happen to share your outlook on that. I really like having different pursuits because it keeps those parts of my brain alive, and it is too isolating. But I don't hear a lot of authors say that. So you still do that, don't you? You're still working full time.
Yes.
Writing.
I am a VP of marketing for a life sciences company. So I have a pretty demanding day job. I wouldn't mind reaching a place where I didn't have to have a day job, but then I would do something else, like go work in a wine bar, because I'm also getting ready for that phase of my life where I can quit this corporate gig. I just passed my wine and spirit education trust level 1, and I'm going to do my level 2 at the end of this month. So I'm building the education for my next career.
Is that the sommelier training?
Yeah, I'm not going to go all the way there.
Okay, tell me. So here's one thing I want to ask, and I'm going to get all off sort of chronology here, but you had a full-time job. You wrote your first book and sold it, and I presume you had intentions to continue writing. You had a brand new baby, and now you don't have the baby anymore, but now you're doing this pretty demanding training for learning. It's not so demanding. How do you find all the time to do this? Plus, you have 9 books.
I think most people have the time.
Say more.
I think it's a prioritization thing. It's not time, it's prioritization. What do we prioritize? I prioritize good food. Let's take that.
I love if you are not following her on her social media, please enjoy her food posts.
we love good food. So I make an effort to find good restaurants. I look at recipes. I cook, buy good wine, match the wine. It's a priority for me.
Mhm.
Um, I live to eat and not eat to live. So we prioritize that. That's important to us. Um, so as long as we can prioritize what is important, I think we can find time for it. Now, I'm also in a very luxurious position right now. My kids have gone. I'm an empty nester. I've always had a very understanding family, leave her alone. And um, mostly I'm able to find the time to do the things I want to do. I also don't do things I don't like to do. I don't. I have friends who are like, oh, I have to go for this thing, but I don't like the people. I'm like, oh, why are you going for that? Especially, oh, but it's family. I'm like, but you don't like these people. Whoa, why go? I end up spending time at work doing a lot of things I'm supposed to do that I have to do. I have to sit in meetings with people. I have to do all of these things. So in my personal life, I do things I like to do. If I don't feel like cooking, I'm not going to cook. If we have a party to go to, but I don't like those people, I'm not going. Even like in Copenhagen, we had a lot of family. And if there was something, especially on the weekend, they would have these long weekend parties, and I'm tell son, knock yourself out. I'm not going. I would sit and write. So again, it's a prioritization, right? I am prioritizing the things that are important to me.
Mhm.
Instead of whatever is expected of me, which means that probably not following a lot of societal norms. I want, people who are like, I'm hanging out with my college buddies, but I don't like 3 of the 4 people I hang out with. Why? If you don't like them, don't spend time with them. Life's short.
So is your writing fairly time consuming, or do you have a routine where you've got it off in
Oh
blocks of time?
no, no. There is no routine. There is um, and writing is very tiring. You know that. You write. It's exhausting.
Mhm.
So at the end of a work day, it's usually very difficult for me to write. But since I started a new job early this year and I work East Coast hours, it's actually been a little interesting because I start at 5:30 in the morning. So by like 3:30, I'm like cooked. And I moved into downtown LA, and I usually just pack my computer bag and I go find a wine bar, sit down and write there for like 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
And then I come back home and, usually if I'm cooking, I'll cook. If not, we go out and then I go to bed early. But that has been kind of interesting because I've never done that before. I write on weekends, depending upon where I am in the story. If I've hit a wall, then, I seem to have a lot of other stuff to do on the weekends instead of writing. But if it's going well, then I will write. I do write when I'm on vacation.
Okay. How does your
Um,
family feel about that? Doesn't
but
matter.
leave it alone. So I find the time, and I just think we find the time for the things that are important to us. Like I
Mhm.
have friends who make the time to go to the gym, go to uh, handball or basketball or whatever they do. They make time for these things. All of these things take time, but we prioritize that. This is important for me, therefore I'll do it. For some reason, going to the gym is not important to me, so I'm not going. And I'll probably say, I don't have the time. I do have the time if I
Right.
want to do it.
Let me go back to your publishing. So you get what is the brass ring for many new authors, which is a publishing contract with a major publisher. What happens next?
Apparently, it's not easy. I thought I climbed Mount Everest in my shorts, for God's sake. I got a 2 book contract, Valentine Books. I was like, it's gonna be great. They did okay. Then I sold a 3rd book. Then they
Also to
didn't want to buy the
Valentine.
fourth. Yeah, then the 4th book, they were like, then the 5th book was even harder. And then they said, we won't buy from you anymore. I was like, oh, heartbroken. My life is over. I'll never be happy again. If I can't do this, what am I left with? Somehow, having a book contract is great inspiration to meet deadline.
Mm.
it's harder to write when there's like no book contract out there.
Well, and I'm
And
also guessing there was some kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, mental, emotional, psyche effect to your publisher deciding not to stick with you anymore. Was there?
yes. So yeah, I was like, I'm a loser, I'm a failure. I think I had 5 books then. Yeah, 5 books. And I was like, it's over.
That's a
It's
lot.
over. It's over. I'm a has-been, and I already had trouble when people ask, what do you do? I would never say I'm a writer. Like people at work would go years working and then say, you didn't know you wrote books. So I
Why
never
is
talked
that?
about it. I try to keep them very separate. I keep my LinkedIn, Facebook very, very, very separate.
Is that for
Um,
professional reasons, or is there something there that you?
I don't do it anymore, but I used to keep them very separate. I don't know because I don't know. It
I
was
used to
just
keep my pen name separate from my editing work, and I realized that the main one reason I was doing it was because editing is my heart, and I wanted my authors to know that the authors I worked with to know that it is my number one
uh,
priority. But I realized it was also fear. I didn't know if that was any part of yours. Like if people see me
probably,
one way and then read this other thing, does that affect how they
yeah.
look at me in that other
I mean,
capacity?
I have a sex scene in my first book. What do you think?
Oh,
Never wrote a sex scene after that. Um, but those kind of things. I think there is this fear of they're going to read this book and what will they think about me? Um, is it too silly?
so did that
Um,
change?
yeah, I had a coach, and I got older, and I got very comfortable with who I am, and happy to tell everybody I write books. I it's on my LinkedIn. I put it on my CV.
Oh,
I
that's
just,
nice.
I talk to anybody when they say, "Hey, what do you do in your free time?" I write books. Um, I've become more comfortable with it. I am proud of it. I'm not embarrassed. I think a part of it was also I think I was kind of a loser author. I wasn't selling a lot of books. People would say, "Oh, would I have heard about you?" I'm like, "No, of course you haven't. I'm not freaking Dan Brown." And then there's always the joker who would say, "Oh, J.K. Rowling." I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah, I'll just do that.
yeah. Why don't I just do that?" Yeah. And
Was
then
that
there'll be the jokers who'll say, "If only I had time." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what's between you and the New York Times bestseller list, baby. It's time. Because if you had time, you'd knock this thing out." Then there's someone who said, "I like words, you write books." I'm like, okay, people are crazy. So I reached a place where I just didn't.
was that
I-
worse after your publisher had not
oh yeah, it
picked
got
you up?
even worse. Then I was telling nobody about the books because then they'd be like, "So are you still writing?"
And were
Yes.
you?
Is oh yeah, but nobody was buying. Um, and that's when there was depression, not just because of this. In general, I wasn't feeling great. And so I wasn't writing, but then I wanted to write. So I decided I'd finished working on a book and I said, okay, I'm going to go find a new agent. I went and found a new agent. We were still in Copenhagen. I found a new agent, great agent. I still have her. Now it's been over 10 years. Uh, so we talked and she took on my book, which turned out to be A House for Happy Mothers. And we tightened it and edited it for years. I don't know, it took a long time, but she's very thorough. And during that time, I decided to start back writing again. And I started to write a comedy about depression because I wanted to laugh. It
Mhm.
wasn't supposed to see the light of day, it was just funny. And I said it in Denmark and I said it in Copenhagen. I love Copenhagen, the city. And because I read out to my husband everything I write. Um, Even that's so he never knows what got deleted. Sometimes when he comes back, he goes, "Well, what happened to that?" I'm like, "Oh, I deleted that." So he has no clue what's going on. But it was kind of funny. So we both had a good laugh, and that was the purpose of that book. And then my agent tried to sell the book to everybody and their mother, and they all said, "No, thank you." So I was like, now it's really over. It's over.
But you
And
had
then we
had
got
a sixth book published in the interim.
no, there was nothing. It was a
Wait, after
blank
the
slate.
five, and
There was
then you.
nothing.
So who published House for Happy Mothers?
Lake Union.
Okay, and so you did have that, and then wrote Copenhagen Affair,
While
and nobody wanted it.
while it was being while I was working on House for Happy Mothers with my
Gotcha.
agent
Okay.
and I was writing this book just for fun.
Okay.
And, in the middle, I wrote a book out of sheer need to write it. Um, One of my good friends, her name is Leslie Udwin. Leslie is a BAFTA award-winning producer, and she directed this documentary called India's Daughter, which was actually banned in India and did very well and won a lot of awards. And India's Daughter was about this horrible rape case in India, in Delhi, that took place in 2012, about a young woman who was raped in a bus.
Mm.
It was horrible and terrible. And Leslie wanted to make a documentary because it started these demonstrations, which went on endlessly. Women who were like out there saying enough is enough. So it kind of struck a chord with the country. And Leslie was husband's Danish and she lived in Denmark. And I didn't know her that well at that time. She calls me in the middle of out of the blue, and she says, "Hey, do you speak Hindi?" Well, I was thinking, yeah, I can understand Hindi. And then she said, "Well, I need help in transcribing. Can you help me transcribe? Because I don't know how to cut the film because the interview is in Hindi." I said, it's not that good, my Hindi. And she goes, no, it's fine. It's for my purpose. I need to transcribe. I just need to know where to cut the film. I'm like, okay. And then she said, oh, just to let you know, I interviewed one of the rapists. I was like, okay, I told my husband, how bad can it be? And Leslie, didn't trust me at that point. So she actually came to my place and we did it together because this was gold, right? This interview, she got into Tihar jail and interviewed this rapist. And it took us 6 hours to transcribe the first 60 minutes, and I cried a lot. I just stopped therapy, telling my therapist, I'm going to take a break. I called him and I said, I'm back. It was really, really hard. It was horrible. And I still can't see that documentary without like bursting into tears. I didn't feel comfortable talking to my husband about it because it was so ugly and horrible, but then eventually I did. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I thought it would be like a small project, and 6 months later, I'm still working on a documentary. She's putting something together for BBC. I'm doing the subtitles. We worked endlessly together on this. And I really needed to get it out of my system. So I wrote a fictionalized version called The Anatomy of a Rapist. And it was essentially to get this out. Mm-hmm. And I remember I sent it to my agent, Rahane, and she goes, I love it. Nobody will ever buy it. So at this point, she sells a house for happy mothers. I have been working on this comedy about depression for my own, and all I have is The Anatomy of a Rapist sitting because Lake Union says, hey, this is going to be a prime first read thing. So we need the next book. And I'm like, I don't have anything. And at that time, I just started to think about a book, and that was about, I call it my torture book, which I never wrote. I think I wrote maybe half of it. It was about a Syrian refugee who comes to Denmark. And they were like, my agent was like, I don't know, Amulya, rapist, torture. I said, well, I wrote this funny thing about Copenhagen. And she goes, oh, let me take a look. And I was like, it's in really poor shape. And she goes, no, send it to me. Let me take a look. And she looks at it and she goes, this is great. Fix up the first 50 pages and I'm going to send it to Lake Union. And I was like, really? This book? And I was calling it entropy at that point. Entropy means, there's disorder in the universe. And I wanted to talk about entropy from the perspective of marriage. It's like a closet, right? You clean it up, you put all your shirts and everything neatly inside. And then like 2 months later, everything is, disorder is only going to increase. Not more order is not going to come into a closed system. And if marriage is a closed system, which it is, there's going to be constant disorder. So the system will change. So I had this, so they hated the title Entropy. And we ended up with The Copenhagen Affair. And that was my second book that came out with Lake Union. And we didn't know then, but today it got optioned by Warner Brothers in a production deal with Lily Collins and Mindy Kaling. And I
I
can't
just read
wait.
that. I could not be more thrilled for you. And also, you know how much I love that book. So I
It'll be
cannot
so
wait to see
fun.
it on a screen. I don't, this may be a good time to tell viewers as well that I'm staring right now at a piece of art that I bought from you, that it was inspired by that book because I loved the book, but I also love your art. And you are also a painter among all of your other pursuits.
Yeah, painting is more of therapy,
Okay.
because sometimes I don't have the energy to write, but I still need some kind of creative outlet. And, there's just this much wine you should drink on a weekday. So I paint. But there's no judgment in the painting. I'm not trying to make the best painting I can. I just want to meditate.
Do you still sell your paintings? May I post your website?
Oh, absolutely. I haven't been painting in a while, but I think I still have some art. And I
Good.
just started a new painting because it's time.
Well, I'll put it up just in case people would like to see some of your past work because, I think it's gorgeous. All right. So
Thank
you
you.
started with Ballantine, you moved to another publisher, and now you're with another publisher. Do you want to
Mm.
talk about that transition?
Yeah. So I always wanted to write a mystery, but I can't plot. I usually write a book. I'm just as interested in finding out what happens in the end. That's why I'm writing it because I have no clue how it's going to end. But in a mystery, you can't do that nonsense because you should know who did the murder or who's the bad guy or whatever, because you can then paint yourself in a corner. Um, but my husband and I had been talking about this character who I wanted to make a private investigator or a journalist or a cop. I wasn't sure at that time. We started talking about him like 10 years ago. And we kind of cooked up the story about him that he lived in these, they're called Kartoffelrakkerhus. It's a potato townhouse. These are very old townhouses in Copenhagen, right by the lake in the center of the city. And renovating them is all labor of love. So, he was living there and he kept renovating. And the renovations never end. And he had a daughter from an ex. Um, and was very, in Denmark, they don't call them stepfather and stepmother, but they call them bonus father and bonus mother. So, and he's like really close to his daughter's bonus father. And, like took years. We would just like once in a while, I'm like, every time I would think, oh, I should write this book. And the book I wanted to write was the murder of a famous right-wing politician in Denmark. And an Iranian or an Iraqi refugee is framed for that murder, and then something will happen. And as I started to but it never came through because I just didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't plot it. I didn't know what was happening. I kind of tried writing the first 50 pages many times. It never worked out. And then COVID hit.
Hmm.
And I was missing Copenhagen desperately. I was actually supposed to, March, we closed down. Right before that, I was in Amsterdam and Munich. And I was going to go to Copenhagen in April, I think. I had to go, like, I was traveling, like, I think next 3 months were booked. And then no travel. And I was missing Copenhagen. I was missing Europe, I was missing just life, and going out to restaurants. And so I decided to start writing this book. And it clicked for me that I wanted, I started to kind of compare, and I don't know where it came from, but World War II, how Danes treated non-Danish Jews as to how they are treating refugees today, and then started this journey onto research into World War II. Denmark's World War II history. Because when I think of Denmark's World War II history, the one thing a lot of people know is most Danish Jews were saved by being shipped to Sweden. But there's so much more to that story. There's a collaborator history. Danish Jews were Danes first, so they saved them. But there were a lot of Jews who came from, Germany, who were sent back to die.
Mm.
There is and as my husband and I started to work on this, we were like, I said, did you know this? He's like, no, I never knew this. We were finding new things constantly. Um, I didn't know that all the people who were transported from Denmark to Sweden by fishing boats had to pay. It was an expensive trip. I know. There was collaborators' history was like really ugly. And it was the collaborators who were killed or executed later. These were the small collaborators, like the poor laundress who had to wash the Germans' clothes, or this young girl who was sleeping with some German soldier, or somebody who was raped by a German someone. These were the people who were attacked after the Germans left. And the politicians, the big companies, they did just fine. They made a lot of money and they continued. And these companies still exist. And the name of these collaborators had not been revealed. They are being locked under some 83-year rule or something like that. And so I learned something new about Danish history, and so did my husband. And I kind of put these two together and decided to tell this story with a protagonist, who lived in a townhouse and couldn't stop renovating. And I wanted to write a protagonist who was not Nordic noir protagonist, because I don't know if you watch Nordic noir or read, the cop or the private detective, whoever, has issues, alcoholic, child abuse,
Kind of the noir
somebody is
genre in general.
autistic. Yeah. There's always some. I was like, that's not Copenhagen. Copenhagen people are well dressed. So I wrote about a guy who's well dressed, loves the blues, plays the guitar, enjoys life, eats well, drinks well, and is fairly self-aware. And I had a really good time writing it. I had so much fun.
So this one's a
writing it.
mystery, you said, right? You moved
This
into
one's a
genre.
mystery. Yeah.
And
I had to
so were
plot
you
it.
just like wanting to try a new genre, and this
No,
was
I
the
wanted to go
story
to
that spoke to you?
Copenhagen.
You what?
I wanted to go to Copenhagen and I wanted to kill a politician.
Okay. So it turned into a mystery. You didn't set out to write a mystery. And so
It was just, I had so much fun doing it. I had such a good time. And I had called it, because he's a Nina Simone fan, I had called it Sinner Man, which I still think is a good title. And I wrote it again, like the Copenhagen affair. This was just fun. COVID fun. But then when I finished it, I was like, it's not bad. So I called my agent and I said, well, I wrote a private investigator book. She goes, uh-huh. I was like, so you want to read it? She's like, sure. She's never sold a mystery. I've never written a mystery. Then she read it and she said, this is great. I'm going to go sell it. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, it'll never sell. First book, I got 2 offers. It was nuts. We were negotiating. A Death in Denmark.
Oh, this is the current one.
Yes.
Okay.
This is A Death in Denmark.
Wow. So this is sort of a reinvention in some ways for you.
Oh, yeah. I've had so much fun writing this book. It was so much fun.
I love this theme from you. Like, you talk about how much all of the books that you write, and just the ones I've read, I know, are all very different in feel and topic and theme. And you seem to follow your fun in finding what to write about. Does that sound accurate to your process?
I mean, come on, writing, it's hard, right? You should be having fun doing it.
Oh, I love that advice.
I mean, you should. I mean, editing especially. I mean, we edit a book like 10, 15, 20 times.
Yeah.
You have to like it. If it's boring, first, the reader's going to be bored. Second, I mean, you have to have fun. I want to enjoy myself when I write.
You sound like you focus more on the process part of this career than necessarily the product. Like, you don't worry about, is this going to sell? What's the next thing I should do for my career? But rather, what's fun? What do I want to write? What speaks to me? Is that accurate?
Yeah, because I don't have a career in writing. If I had a career in writing, then I would be able to have that analysis, right?
But you do. And this is the thing. Like, I mean, right now, I think there are probably authors listening to this who go, she has 9 books. She's had all this success. books made into screenplays, working on screenplays, working on
Oh,
this
that just
documentary.
happened. But I'm also
Everything just happens though, right?
I know, but it's like I still feel like it's such a difficult career. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sell a 10th book. You know, selling my 9th book was hard. Selling my 6th book was harder than selling my first book. I am that writer who's sitting in Midwest hell. I just want permission to write. I keep saying I just want to sell enough books so that somebody will keep buying it so I can keep writing. Um,
I love
and
that.
that seems to be difficult. That is not easy. They stop buying if the book doesn't sell.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult in
There's-
this market,
Yes.
but to me, it is so much what allows a writer to sustain a long-term career, because if you don't think of it that way, I think it's really easy to burn out and get discouraged because it is a hard business.
It's a very hard business. There is no, I did such a great job. I wrote a great book. Yeah, but nobody read it, so who
Yeah.
cares?
And even if you did, you're only as good as your last one. You're only as good as your last moment in the sun. We don't do it because we love it. I feel like that's a recipe for being miserable in this career, because there's so much that will make you miserable. And I love your approach.
It's very hard. And I love telling a story. I love writing that story. I love telling myself the story. I want to enjoy that process of, there's some kind of, especially when I edit sometimes, I'm like, mostly it's like, oh God, did you just write that? And then sometimes like, did I just write that? And it's I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but there's an excitement in that. Look, I created this. But it is a labor. It takes a long time. It takes me a year to write a book, and then somebody reviews it and gives it 1 star. I don't read the reviews anymore.
Smart.
But did I tell you that Publishers Weekly just gave A Death in Denmark a starred review?
No, but congratulations. So you've had such gosh, I'm going to call it a writing career, because it is. And the journey you've been on is so varied. What advice would you give baby you, or an author starting out in their career, or an author anywhere in their career, about how to approach it with, I love the smile on your face when you're talking about almost everything we've talked about. How do you get there? What's your advice for writers for that?
Be very aware that it's not going to pay the bills unless you're very, very lucky. I don't know how else to put this. So marry well.
Good advice. Solid.
Which I didn't do. By well, I mean marry somebody with lots of money, not a nice guy or a nice woman or a nice person. Or have a full-time job. Also, writing is not going to give you any kind of instant satisfaction. Think about it. It takes you a year to write a book. Every time you write the end, you're like, I got another edit to do. After the other edit, you send it to your agent. Then you wait. Will she hate it? Will she love it? Will she hate it? And then she sends an email back. I read it. Here are my edits. And then you edit it again. And then it goes to the editor or editors, where you collect more rejections. So it is not, by the time the book comes out and you finally have the book in hand, and then, I keep it everywhere in the house so that I can see it and I carry it with me everywhere. It's not instant. I wrote that book 2 years ago. So what I like about having a job is I have a product launch. I have I get those wins, because you need to have wins in your life. So I recommend having some kind of a full-time job that gives you a win and pays the bills. Unless you married very well, in which case I'm jealous, more power to you. Or you're independently wealthy, either way. And that you have to love editing. Don't believe the myth that, if I edit it too much, it'll take the essence away. No, it'll just take the garbage away. Just keep editing.
You're making me so happy right now. My little editor soul is singing right now.
No, really, some people I've heard, they'll say, but if I edited too much, I'm like, no, edit.
Or they think the writing is the main work of it, and it's not.
No, God, the writing takes less time. I mean, it's
Mhm.
painful. It's a lot of work, but it's the editing, and you can keep endlessly editing. I am never at a place where I think, okay, now it's ready. It's more like I'm sick of this, it's going away. Not because I'm thinking, I think I've done a really good job editing it. No, I'm on my 9th edit now, and you know what? The hell with it. It's gonna go. That's the place we reach. So I always tell writers, edit. Don't be afraid of editing. Don't be afraid of deleting, because when writers say, I have written half a book and deleted the whole thing because I needed to start fresh. And I remember my husband was like, did you just delete 100 pages, 200 pages? How could you do that? I'm like, there was nothing to save in there. He's like, what do you mean? And I think writers are afraid of being able to backtrack and say this was crap and delete it. You'll never get there. Uh, you have to have the courage to say, or the confidence to say, I can do this again.
Mhm.
Writing is not the difficult part. Writing well is the difficult part.
Well, that's just a whole basket of excellent advice. Thank you. I love your joy in this career. I love what I would call a very healthy outlook on it, where it is very much a part of your life and who you are, but it does not dictate and define your level of happiness and satisfaction. Like, it is a part of you. You are not serving it. I think that's really healthy. And
Well,
yet
you
you're
also caught me at a time where I got a starred review and I have a contract. So yeah.
I know it's a series of this, which is what I want authors to take away from this series and all the stuff that authors talk about. It's never smooth sailing. That's what it is. It's ups and downs. And if you don't know at the core why you're doing this and what fulfills you about it, it's a really rough ride.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Where can readers and viewers find you best?
You can find me on Facebook at author Amulya. You
I'll
can
put all
find
these
me
below.
on my website, amulyamalladi.com. You can find me in downtown LA at wine bars.
Fair enough. I'll put all the links in the window below. And thank you again. We're way overdue for this, and it's just been a complete pleasure. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much, not just for this, but for editing 2 of my books and making them so much better than they were. I loved working with you. And I hope we get the chance again someday.
I do too. I absolutely loved it. And I think of you seriously every day with this. I wish I could turn the camera around, but I'll post a picture in this video of this
Excellent.
piece of art on my wall, because seriously, I look at it every day and it's such an inspiration on every level. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, my friend, take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.